Another important aspect to consider is how your voice actually sounds. In the same way that there are a few rules that you need to have to get the right body language, there are a few things that we need to be aware of to make sure that our voice is coming across well and presenting you in the right light. You want to come across confident and make sure that your voice is at an appropriate volume. You don't want to have your voice mumbling, so quite often that's an easy thing for students that feel shy or don't feel very confident in themselves. You want to make sure that you're speaking at an appropriate volume, which is clearly audible. When getting feedback from anyone who you're practicing with, it's not just a matter of, is your voice heard? Can you hear their voice? It's a matter of, can you clearly and audibly hear each and every word that they say? Speaking too fast can increase the risk that you will trip over your own words. Your tongue is a muscle, and using it at too fast a speed can wear it out and increase the risk that you will fudge your words. You want to make sure that your tone is coming across confident. So sometimes when students are unsure about what they're speaking about, they will have a bit of an inflection at the end of their sentence. So, for example, this is an adjective noun. So if we do the increased tone at the end for a student that sounds uncertain of what they're saying, this is an adjective noun. It sounds as though they're making it into a question, and it's very easily done when you're talking naturally and you're unsure about what you're speaking about. But if we compare it to, this is an adjective noun. So if you drop the tone at the end of your sentence, it doesn't make it sound like a question and you just sound a lot more confident. Next, we want to think about enthusiasm. So generally, when we're enthusiastic about what we're speaking about, we increase, or we have variety in the tone and the volume that we speak at. So your speech becomes more lively and you just generally become a bit more captivating. To appear enthusiastic, speakers have a bit of variety in the tone of their speech. Monotone speech just sounds like you don't care what you're talking about, and for the interviewer, hearing a lackluster story that sounds a bit flat and monotoned isn't very compelling. When someone is excited about what they're talking about, they tend to vary the tone and the volume of how they're speaking, and their facial expressions tend to be a bit more pronounced, and then the story becomes a bit more lively and therefore compelling. If creating vocal variety is something that you struggle with, then you're going to have to consciously force yourself to utilize it when you're speaking. Over time, hopefully the practice will make you do it naturally yourself. You can try recording yourself speaking about a topic or a story that you're particularly excited about. Try one recording where you are deliberately sounding enthusiastic, you're creating variety in the tone and the volume that you're speaking at, and then do another recording where you're deliberately keeping everything monotoned and making sure that there's very little variety in the tone and the volume that you're speaking at. You'll notice that between the two, the one that has the more dynamic changes in your voice and your tone will be a lot more engaging. That's the kind of energy that you want to be bringing into the way that you speak throughout the interview. Again, if you find that this is something that doesn't come naturally to you, you're just going to have to practice until it sounds like you're more enthusiastic and you've got more variety in your vocal tone when you're speaking. To sound controlled, you don't want to be speaking at too high a speed. It increases the risk that you're going to trip over your own words and it just sounds a bit frantic. So going back to one of the example questions that we had earlier, we will try doing it with a high speed and just see how it makes it sound not ideal. So I was fortunate enough to see a central arterial line being placed while I was on my ICU work experience. The attention to detail and level of skill needed to do this correctly showed me how in medicine, dedication over a long period of time is needed to develop competency in various practical and non-practical skills. Speaking at too high a speed just sounds really, really awful. If you're deciding between speaking too fast or too slow, it's definitely way better to speak just a smidge slower than you normally would. Alongside speaking at an appropriate speed, utilizing verbal pauses can be a very effective technique. So as we mentioned earlier, in the initial phase of being asked a question, it's absolutely fine to take a couple of moments to pause and think about your question. And again, at the end, we can actually use verbal pauses throughout our speaking, and it can have a really high utility throughout your answer. It shows that you're calm, collected, and in control of the way that you're speaking. Similar to speed, if an answer is given with no pauses at all, it just sounds artificial, it doesn't sound very controlled, it can come across very poorly. So you want to deliberately use pauses at moments that seem appropriate. So we have another example. So we'll use the work experience example, we'll recite it without pauses and then we'll recite it with pauses, and we'll see the difference between the two. During my work experience, I saw firsthand the empathy that doctors had to show their patients. When delivering bad news, they ensured that the patient and their family members were present in a quiet place and gave another team member their bleep to ensure it did not go off during the consultation. Taking these steps allowed the doctors to give the family their whole attention and answer any questions they had fully. They used simple language to explain the complex underlying cause of the disease. I felt this showed how medicine is a field that provides the ideal opportunity to apply both interpersonal and academic skills. So we'll try it again, but with pauses. During my work experience, I saw firsthand the empathy that doctors had to show their patients. When delivering bad news, they ensured that the patients and their family members were present in a quiet place and gave another team member their bleep to ensure it didn't go off during the consultation. Taking these steps allowed the doctors to give the family their whole attention and answer any questions they had fully. They used simple language to explain the complex underlying cause of the disease. I felt this showed how medicine is a field that provides an ideal opportunity to apply both interpersonal and academic skills. You see the difference between those two examples. There are pauses deliberately, and by putting in those pauses, it gives the interviewer an opportunity to have a think about what you've said, and it really shows that you're in control of the way that you're speaking. You want to use short pauses at the end of each sentence, and you can use longer pauses when there's been a change in the story, or to just highlight particular things about what you've been saying. Another really powerful way that you can use pauses is in describing things. So quite often describing things in 3 words can be very useful. So we've got another example. So anytime that you're answering a question in 3s, you can utilize pauses then as well. For example, during this project, I relied particularly on my organization, leadership, and communication skills. So using 3s can be a really good time to use your pauses, because again, it makes the interviewer focus on each of the words that you said, and it gives them time to digest the words that you've put across the table. So the next part of voice control is to make sure that you aren't using any filler words, and filler words tend to be ums, ers, and like. You need to absolutely cut these from your vocabulary. They are very, very useless words. They don't add anything to your interview whatsoever. They just come across very poorly in your communication. Whenever you're speaking, you want to absolutely have no ums and ers. You need to record yourself speaking, and if you're hearing yourself saying ums and ers, then practice over and over again to the point where you are having very, very few, almost no ums and ers whatsoever. You want to become comfortable with having moments of silence, utilizing pauses, and not filling in those moments of silence with any filler words like ums and ers. They don't add anything to your answers whatsoever. On the topic of vocabulary, you want to make sure that you're not using any slang. So you only want to be using terminology that any adult of any age would be able to understand. And when using medical terminology, make sure that you know what it is, because they can quite easily challenge you on what that term means. And you want to make sure that you aren't being caught out by using words that you aren't familiar with.